Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah, I know. Oh, I mean, sure. I like. Yeah, like I haven't really played with them. Just reached out to me. So we made it through finals of like high jump and was like third. So close. Like before we got second, they both jumped 158. And I know, yeah. And so then they tried to do it, goes up to group five, tries to go up group 161, but neither make it. And so boy, he thinks so they both jump on because is it in his second try? Kai did his try, so Kai was still like, yeah, but yeah, the boy who won, Cooper, who carries it in front of him, I jump like, I think I 100. I'm 100. So yeah, I mean, he's so sorry. I'm so sorry. Didn't really know what to expect because of last year because I COVID. But it was so to me though, like yeah, like is he doing okay? Yeah, he always does like compliments. Like he used to do it, but he only actually this was his first summer he did. But, you know, with scissors you can only get me so once a week. He's always he doesn't really do. Like he lands. So sorry about it. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Like, yeah. Don't even use it. What the tent? The tent side. That was my t-shirt. That's not
direct them and
what happens because your network spaces better off that if they receive an offer, they can potentially accept the other offer, but they have to give you like 3 working days. Yeah, yeah. So basically, if they receive a better offer, they can come basically on the offer, and you either need to go home. So that's really standard. Definitely. And yeah, it's common to have it. Another offer out, but eventually you're going to take 2 weeks. They say, oh, so it's pretty standard. So which is fine, and they query that one. The only thing I would query is like, there are planning normally they take them
everyone. So, kia ora koutou, host the Day Toko Inua. I'd like to welcome everyone to clearing off a application of masking dust Welhom development of plan change for combined Wairaka district planning. Before I do some more general introductions, I'd like to confirm some health and safety measures for this venue. The emergency exit for this room is right behind us in the fire exit, so we hear alarms obviously up and out. There is a mustering area in the car park to the right of me over here. And of course, in terms of all round earthquakes, it's long and strong be gone, but obviously just anything shaking we get under the desks at this stage. So toilets are out to the right, at the back of the room, and cell phones, just to those off. Any questions about the venue and health and safety? So just a quick introduction. This is my name, Hale Day. People in the room from various hearings. I've also done a lot of work on your side of rooms. Development, resource consents, for me, and we're pleased to be here. I'll just hand over to introduce himself.
Thanks, Stephen. Like Stephen, I'm a planning practitioner in private practice based in Wellington. I started my career in Christchurch, central government department, and then moved into a large private consultancy, and then formed my own practice in 2000. I moved up to Wellington following the Christchurch earthquakes in 2011, initially for a short period, but turned out to be more permanent than I thought it would be. As a planner, I've been involved in numerous aspects of the RMA, both sides of the table, consents, nations, district plan, regional plan changes, private plan changes, and I've branched down into boards of inquiries, environmental relation, fast tracks. Of relevance to this year, I've been involved in a number of private plan changes over the last 3 years, particularly involving rural to urban zoning. The most recent of those have been Palmerston North plan change, known as Whiskey Creek, and also Liverpool, known as Tara Ika. Both of those were urban changes. In terms of retirement village matters, I've been resource consent. One just last year in Wellington, I was a commissioner, and one many years ago. This is my first hearing under the productive land, and possibly one of the first hearings in the country. Well, might be taking it a bit further. One of the initial hearings under that document. I was just going to make a brief comment about the nature of the inquiry that I'm going to bring as a planning practitioner. When I'm involved in zoning inquiries, I always look at the appropriateness of zoning, and it's the appropriate rural to urban. And I use the word appropriate because it's the lawyers and planners of this room will understand that it's a Section 32 construct, something that we have to have in all regard to. And appropriateness to me is determining whether there's any fundamental impediment rezoning. previous plan changes I've been involved in, that's included things like infrastructure, natural hazards, natural values, policy direction. And in this case, I think no secret that the three key issues: transport, infrastructure, and national policy direction, both under the UD and the HPL. And I wanted to share that with you because the answer is there is a fundamental issue not being remedied. And I think the decision is clear. But the answer is no, that there is no fundamental issue in the is focusing on how the offence associated with those matters can be managed through the planning provision. I thought I just wanted to share that with the gallery today, so you understand the sort of questions that I'm going to witnesses over the course of the hearing.
Thank you, David. So we'll just talk a little bit about the purpose of what we've been asked to do in our delegations. We have delegations from Marston Council to make recommendations and change. Doing that, we have the evidence in front of us, and questions, and make a decision with the reasons. So that do have a specific delegation on the basis that we're a two-hearing panel. That in the event of opinions between us, I have a casting vote as chair, and that just unlock any problems with jury where I have to go back to the drawing board. Some terrible examples of that already set up. In the country, we were 1-1 or 2-2, and we got that. So we're hearing this matter under what's called Schedule 1. It sets out provisions for any change for the review of the plan that's undertaken by council, and it's also provides provision for private plan change advanced for the parts of the act. So that just sets out a bit of a menu for what she worked through up to the stage of hearing, which is my reading is that's all been done correctly and well, and we're here to I do want to have a. Oh no, look, I'll go to appearances now. So, just so we all know who's in the room, I will ask for sort of formal appearances from any council parties, and then I'll go around the room and just ask for a general introduction. Starting with you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou katoa. Tēnā mahana tōku ingoa. I'm counsel for Welhom Developments, along with Jacob.
Any other council here representing parties?
Kia ora koutou. My name is Rachel Connor. I'm counsel for Marston.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm not sure because we're looking at a screen. We're not looking at the screen. So I'll talk about the teams and the screen protocol shortly, but how we're going to manage that. But again, is there any other council appearing for a party?
Kia ora, Commissioners. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name's Liam Bullen, counsel for Waka Kotahi.
And welcome.
Thank you. And I also have Samantha Fowler appearing online as well. She'll be appearing in person on Friday with me. So I'll be tuning in today and tomorrow remotely. And I can also see Mr. Glenn Connolly and Mr. Richard Landon Lane online, who are Waka Kotahi witnesses as well.
What we'll do, we'll actually go to everyone one by one, just to say hello and welcome everyone to the hearing. Thanks, Liam.
Thank you.
Right, so from there, I'd really just like to go around the room and say a quick hello. We're going to be here for a few days, and it's just a nice way of starting off. So, maybe Georgia, looking at you, kick off.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Georgia Alston
tōku ingoa. I work for Foresight as a graduate planner, and I'm just here to take minutes and coordinate teams. Nice to meet you all.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Megan Bata-Koinga. I'm a principal planner with Foresight and a colleague of George's, and I'm acting as the reporting officer for the District Council.
You don't need to stand up, just sit comfortable.
Ryan Rose, representing Marsden District Council in the civil and infrastructure space.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Perhaps coming across with a zigzag around the room.
Kia ora koutou. Excuse me, I'm Aaron Smale, the General Manager of Development at Somerset.
Yeah, and welcome. Those two gentlemen.
Mitch Lewandowski, Planning Advisor to Welhom.
Welcome. Yeah.
Russell Brents, Civil Engineer with Brunel Consultants.
Thank you, Russell.
Bob Calvin, Development Manager.
Commissioners, Oliver Boyd, National Development Manager.
Hi, I'm Harriet Fraser, Traffic Engineer, helping the council.
Oh, Harriet. Steve,
yeah.
Oh, no, sorry, we'll go back to over there.
Kia ora koutou, James Bentley, Landscape Architect with Welhom School.
James.
Good morning, Commissioners. James Dillon from AQS, looking at.
Morning, everyone. Tim Heath, Property Economics Assisting.
Mark, for you.
Good morning, Mark.
Sally, Linda.
Hey, Roger, nice to see you.
Kia ora.
And look at the wall. We'll do some more introductions on the screen. So maybe Ben, is that Glenn?
Kia ora, my name's Glenn Connolly. I'm a Senior Safety Engineer for Waka Kotahi.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Oh, George is there. I'm still thinking, Richard, to see you there.
Kia ora koutou, Richard Landon Lane, Principal Traffic and Safety Engineer for Waka Kotahi.
Kia ora. My name's Melanie Nielsen. I'm a Senior Principal Transport Engineer for Stantec, representing Welhom.
Kia ora, ko Samantha tōku ingoa. I'm a junior appearing for Waka Kotahi under Liam.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. One more person there.
Kia ora, Commissioners. Liam Bullen, Councillor for Waka Kotahi.
All right. There was also the training on from our team. I think maybe it's missing.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Right, let's talk a little bit about the team's recording and the protocol will be following. The hearing will be recorded by Teams. It's quite a new innovation at these hearings, which I find particularly helpful. These people come in by exception when they can't make the hearing. It also gives us a record of questions and answers if we need to go back and check on anything. It absolves us from having to take very detailed notes or do transcripts, which takes a lot of time and effort. So that's the way we'll be running things. But the protocol is, I've got a reasonably quiet voice, so if you're struggling to hear me, particularly at the back of the room on the screen, or David or anyone, please just pipe up. And because we've got the screen behind us. George, I'm going to need to rely on you to just watch the screen. If you can't hear us, please speak up on the wall behind me. Nothing worse than not being able to hear, and we can try and mitigate those sort of issues. I know there is one microphone there, but generally, are people been hearing me okay at the moment? Okay. And if for any chance people are on a skinny line coming to us and you can't get connection, I'm thinking that it would be good just to email the hearing administrator or Megan. If you've got the email there, and just let us know. We can make some other accommodation. I'm not sure whether any others are going to come in online, but let's just make sure it's available to everyone. Any questions about that? Okay. We will now go to timetabling, confirmation of timetabling, and any procedural matters from any party they'd like to raise with us before we get underway. So we've had a bit of touring and froing on the timetable to accommodate everyone. So I understand that sort of works pretty much for all parties.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. On that issue of timetabling, you may have seen what the directions provided for the highly productive land evidence to be provided tomorrow morning with supplementary legal submissions. You may have seen, to the extent you've pre-read my legal submissions, that we have addressed the NPS-HPL within the opening legal submissions. Given that the evidence from Mr. Milner and Mr. Allen are largely on all fours, we don't see the need for that to be parked. Mr. Allen has a summary statement that also includes some brief comments about the matters of agreement between myself and Mr. Milner. In terms of the order in which Welhom's witnesses were going to present, in some ways it would make for Mr. Allen to present today. And so did want to check, I guess, in light of your directions that had suggested that was going to occur tomorrow, given that there isn't wholesale rebuttal that's actually required, that Mr. Allen is ready to present on all matters today, rather than potentially having presented a summary statement today and then rebuttal tomorrow. And so in your hands in that regard, but certainly we are very happy to have Mr. Allen present today.
Mr. Allen will be away this evening. Will he be available when Mr. Milner's presenting or not?
So he is available. He is available until about 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. So that was why we had sought those changes to make sure that that was accommodated, and appreciate the earlier start tomorrow that was intended to accommodate Mr. Allen's availability. In my submission, it would there wouldn't be any risk in having Mr. Allen present early, and then Mr. Allen can remain for Mr. Milner's evidence person tomorrow morning.
Okay, let's do that. Okay.
Thank you.
That's fine. Any procedural matters, Mr.
So that was the primary one. The only other matters were the directions hadn't specifically provided for rebuttal evidence, apart from on the issue of the soils. Now, in order to assist the panel, and again, you would have seen it highlighted in my legal submissions, that Mr. Georgeson, Ms. Muirson, and Mr. Lewandowski do have some brief rebuttal comments to assist you in response to the evidence from Waikato. And so the intention was that they were going to, as part of their presentation to you, to provide a summary statement as well as those brief rebuttal comments. So I just wanted to signal to you as well.
Thank you. And that's ideal, because it does, as a proposer, it's fair for you to have the opportunity with your witnesses to respond. So that's appreciate that.
And it's really intended to avoid having wholesale closing at the end that involves a whole lot of substantive evidential matters as well. So I thought that trying to front end that as much as possible would assist everyone.
Good. Is everyone else comfortable with that? Seems to make sense to me. Okay. So any other timetabling or procedural matters for any of the other parties?
From my perspective, but the charge, so she's got
No, just to note that if Mr. Allen presents today, then Mr. Milner won't actually be present to hear that online or in person as the direction that he would be appearing tomorrow.
Look, I'm just thinking about that. Look, if Mr. Allen is available tomorrow, let's have both those witnesses tomorrow. There may be some useful dialogue that we can engender between. As you'll see, my style is, I'm just looking for, good advice, and that might involve some other maybe, but yeah, I think it's pretty safe to do that then, if it's okay.
Certainly, no, very happy to proceed on that basis. And just on that issue of, I guess, hot tubbing of sorts, the other proposal that we had was in terms of our two transport witnesses, so Ms. Nielsen and Mr. Georgeson. Given that there is a degree of overlap in terms of those issues, thought that it would make sense for them both to present their statements and rebuttal, and then to have combined questioning with the other aspect, just because to avoid a situation where you're asking questions that end up being better placed to the other person and then missing that opportunity. Thought that was also something that would be of assistance.
Yeah, that sounds good. Just for that key traffic evidence, it is an area that I would normally have thought about doing a hot tub with the other witnesses, but I've tried to do that before with some online and some not online. This doesn't work, so we won't be using the technique here. Just so everyone knows what a hot tub is, it's a funny acceptable, of course. I suppose it is something that's a thing, and it is. If you look at Google, it is defined as well. Where you have experts have similar expertise, but very similar questioning. It's quite a good technique of actually getting some dialogue going between the experts who are asking the same questions, and can be very successful. But in this case, we won't be using it unless the opportunity is obvious with Mr. Allen and Mr. Moore, which might be quite helpful.
I've got a question for the council, Ms. Connor or Ms. Farr. Do I take that Mr. Hunt won't be appearing?
No, as there was no conflict regarding the noise provisions between the parties, and the requester has not elected to bring anyone from Norman Disney down, Mr. Hunt won't be attending.
Thank you.
Okay. So my final sort of comment on the timetable and procedural matters, I really thank everyone for getting us to this hearing reasonably efficiently and within good time, because we do have an obligation to just get on with it and not have undue delay. So I'd just like to thank all the tables for doing that. Just a little comment about expectations of how we'll run the hearing. We'll make this hearing as informal as possible. You'll notice that my style is I often use first names. I just feel that I'm a peer. I'm not a judge, and I'm not someone that's going to impose any sort of too much structure on the hearing within sort of bounds of reasonableness. You just want to get the best advice and have a good hearing, good spirit, and make sure we get all the information that we need. So that's one expectation. The other thing is that we will be fair. We're not biased. We don't have any, David and I, any sort of reason for having an interest other than making a good decision. So I just want to make that pretty clear. And to do that, an engaging hearing, everyone's comfortable is the best way of achieving that. There will be at a hearing at this level, there is no cross-examination, so you might, see TV shows where there's lots of dramatic cross-examination of witnesses, you won't be seeing that here. It's just not part of the process. We're here to test the evidence and the witnesses and ask questions. That's our role. If any party does have a clarification question that they really are burning to ask a witness at one of the parties, I'm happy to receive any questions like that in writing and with some notice. And I can make decisions whether I can ask those sorts of questions. So that those sort of the general rules. Any questions on those? Right. And the final thing for me is that we have read all the evidence, and but I can't, I suppose, stress enough of the importance for oral evidence questioning for us. We'll probe and quite a few areas, but it's really in the spirit of seeking this information we can. So anyone appearing before us, whether you're an expert or a lay submitter, just make sure you're not too concerned when we're sort of questioning. We're just really looking at getting the best information. So that's really me as an introduction. Is there anything else anyone would like to raise before we get underway? Wall? No.
Commissioner Dash, I think we've got one extra party attending online now, Catherine in demand.
Catherine, can you pop onto the screen and say hello? Greetings. Yeah, speaking of.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
Morning. So, Catherine, are you here on behalf of which party?
Waka Kotahi, although I'm here to listen today.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Right. Your hands, Daniel.
Thank you. So we did pre-circulate some legal submissions yesterday afternoon, and there are copies available. My intention, though, was to take you through those legal submissions.
Please. Yes, we got them this afternoon, requested, but we only just got it from the version now, so just take us through in your time.
Certainly. So if we begin with section 1 of the introduction, Welhom is the requester for the proposed private plan change to rezone approximately 14.7 hectares of land in the north, just to the north of us here, to residential with specific provision for a retirement village. Welhom is a subsidiary of Somerset Group Holdings Limited and is responsible for identifying and acquiring potential sites for new retirement villages. Somerset is one of New Zealand's leading retirement village operators, with 44 comprehensive care retirement villages across New Zealand in various development stages, ranging from site selection to completion. New Zealand is in the midst of a significant housing crisis. Due to our ageing population, there is unprecedented demand for retirement and aged care living options. This is recognised as a serious issue at national scale, and Wairarapa is no exception. Masterton and Carterton are experiencing significant urban growth and require more housing capacity to support this growth. Not only does it affect affordability, but also housing choice. A lack of appropriate aged care housing results in people having to relocate from their established communities to get the care that they need. In their retirement, people deserve to be able to age with their existing communities around friends and family. The plan change is a critical step towards addressing this housing shortage, and more needs to be done to address it. A mixture of both infill and greenfield development is needed to deliver housing for the area. Despite the concerns raised by the reporting planner and various submitters, the evidence on behalf of Somerset is that all potential effects can be appropriately managed through the resource consent process, and that the plan change represents the most appropriate means of achieving the relevant objective of the district plan. in our submission, the hearing panel can have comfort in approving the plan change. And just echoing Commissioner McMahon's earlier comments, absolutely agree that key consideration is, are there any fundamental issues? And in our submission, that's not the case. At 1.6, outline the witnesses who provided evidence in support of the plan change. In terms of the ordering of schedule here from them, just following our discussion earlier, Mr. Allen will move down that order and float depending on how we are tracking. It would make sense for Mr. Heath's evidence to follow Mr. Allen's, but we'll just see in terms of timing today, we'll move him up if required to fill the day. But intended that Mr. Smale, Mr. Brents, and then Mr. Bentley be the first witnesses up. So each of those experts have provided a pre-circulated statement of evidence and will provide a short summary statement when they present. And as I mentioned, there will be some rebuttal comments as well from Mrs. Allen, Georgeson, Lewandowski, and Ms. Nielsen. So the rest of these submissions will provide a brief overview of the plan change, briefly outline the legal framework within which you're required to make your decision, and then go into detail on some of those key issues in legal determination. So in terms of the plan change itself, it seeks to rezone the site from rural primary production to residential, with provision for a retirement village over the majority of the site. The balance of the site is proposed to be utilised for general residential purposes without that additional provision for retirement. The plan change adopts the residential zone rules in the district plan and applies them to the site with some modifications. And the modifications are to accommodate a retirement village on the site as a controlled activity with a height up to 14 metres at the central part of the site. Mr. Lewandowski discusses the proposed provisions in further detail in his evidence, with further modifications made to address matters raised in the Office's Section 42A report and in submissions.
Yes, Mr. Mechanic, it would be important for Mr. Lewandowski to take the panel through those mechanics of that. I think I understand it, but I don't want to working on any false premises. So you could take us through the mechanics of how it works and how the interventions that he's proposing and which Mr. Barr is proposing, that would be useful at the time.
So would it assist following my legal submissions for him to briefly take you through that, just so that that will inform then the rest of the case as well? Yes. Certainly we can back that. Future development of the site is contingent on a future resource consent process. The granular detail of environmental effects arising from future development of the site and how they will be appropriately managed will be carefully considered as part of that future process. As you'll hear, Somerset is concerned that some of the other parties have not understood the distinction between plan change and resource consent stages. Moving on to the legal framework for assessment, as you'll appreciate, the plan change sets out the framework of consideration for subsequent resource consent applications, and that it is necessarily lighter on detail on the final form of development than a subsequent resource consent application would be. Section 74 of the RMA sets out the matters that the council must consider in preparing and changing the district plan. These include the council's functions under section 31, provisions of part 2, council's obligations in relation to section 32, any national policy statements, and the purpose and principles of the RMA. Now, as experienced commissioners, the hearing panel will be aware of that legal framework for assessing the plan change. We do not propose to address it in detail. Instead, we focus on the key issues for determination, and that will specifically include consideration of both section 32 and the national policy statements.
Mr. Mechanic, sorry, I do have a sort of a Socratic style of interrupting.
No, quite all right.
I learned from Judge Smith, and I tried to make my church not as bad as Leonard Connor. In terms of the legal framework, my understanding is that the plan change is not proposing to change any objectives of the district plan.
That's correct.
Yes. And I think under section 32(6), where that's the case, the purpose of the plan change or the objective of the plan change becomes one of the criteria under which the plan change is assessed against. I'm not sure whether Mr. Lewandowski has undertaken that analysis. Yes, I've missed it. But I just wanted to check that as well as giving effect to the purpose and principles of the Act and the documents that under it, what's the role of the purpose of the plan change in terms of assessing appropriateness of provisions?
Certainly, and in that respect, Mr. Lewandowski can speak to his assessment. However, you will have seen the detailed evidence from Mr. Heath, for example, which outlines the need from a supply perspective of aged care provision. And so that and the key purpose that you've got a retirement village operator here seeking rezoning to enable them to establish a retirement village. That coupled with Mr. Heath's evidence will be important in that regard.
Yes. What I'm looking for, and I don't need the answer right now, is a clear statement of purpose, either in Mr. Lewandowski's presentation or the plan change itself, that sets out purpose for the rezoning. Now, obviously, there's a focus on the retirement village. The rezoning is about delivering a residential zoning that would provide for a retirement village, albeit through a resource consent, and provide for residential subdivision through a resource consent, also different activity statuses, of course. But I'm not sure that I saw a key purpose, and maybe during the course of the hearing that can make it clearer.
Certainly.
I have one second question, and it's in terms of section 74. There's been a lot of discussion about the role of the monks, must do in growth study strategy, and the draft plan. And BAR takes a view that they're not necessarily relevant, and if so, they have very little weight. Mr. Lewandowski takes the view, not necessarily a contrary view, but he thinks they are matters we should have regard to, and then there's some thoughts on weighting. Under section 74, what part of section 74 could we have regard to those two documents? Do you advise offhand, or was that something you could?
I'll come back to on the specific aspect of section 74 that allows you to do that.
And it may be different answers for either document. I'm conscious that draft plan is only that, and that the NUGDS notes hasn't been adopted by the council yet, and may have been produced under the local government act.
Yes, and later in my submissions I do address those documents, but as far as the specific aspect of section 74, I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
So in section 4, I outline the key issues for determination. These include those three matters that Commissioner McMahon addressed earlier. So transport and road safety is certainly one. The national policy statements, both on highly productive land and on urban development. The civil engineering or infrastructure issues are also there, as well as visual immunity and some planning matters, including that question of the weighting of non-statutory documents, and section 32 there as well. So moving on to the issue of transport and road safety. Those aspects of the plan change have been thoroughly considered by Mr. Georgeson and Ms. Newison. This is addressed in the transport assessment accompanying the plan change request and in the evidence from those experts. In our submission, that evidence is clear that there is no fundamental transport issue, and appropriate provisions have been proposed within the plan change to ensure that matters of detail can be appropriately addressed through any subsequent resource consent application. Mr. Georgeson.
Can you get to this with planning methods, but as a controlled activities status that you're proposing, except how does mechanics of details around state highway 2 section 4 in terms of further input?
Certainly, and that's there are specific matters of control in relation to that, and then we have been giving further consideration to the information requirement aspect, and whether, in addition to having an information requirement in relation to integrated transport assessment, whether consultation with Waka could be included as a mandatory information requirement that then provides information to the council to assist with their decision making. In addition, the Waka as the road controlling authority also has separately, if there are measures imposed, a developer will still need to engage with them as far as implementing those changes. And so that would be foolish for a developer to forward something that often to be able to be delivered. So at a practical level, engagement with Waka will absolutely be important to the resource consideration.
Would you agree that as currently proposed, no hook to buy or have Waka involved in any detail around resource consent?
Yes, and so Mr. Lewandowski, when he presents, can also speak to that and that change, further change that we are looking at as far as the that requirement for involvement of Waka and having a hook as
So that asking you if you will get that as it evolves, or is that on the table straight away?
So the specific wording of that hasn't been finalised, but that is something that is absolutely.
Thank you.
So returning to 5.3, Mr. Georgeson and Ms. Nielsen have considered the existing transport network against potential effects arising from the future development of the site in scenarios where retirement village is developed or the whole of the site is developed for general residential. And just on that point, the intention is for the majority of the site to be developed for retirement village, but because of the way that the plan change has been framed to fit within the district plan context and to ensure that a worst case scenario is considered, that's why that full residential build out has been considered by the transport experts. And this is within the context of a transport network that has already been designed to manage traffic from the neighbouring Cashmere Oak subdivision, which was considered and approved through a resource consent process. Both Mr. Georgeson and Ms. Nielsen conclude that a range of standard good practice measures can be implemented to appropriately manage effects from future development of the site, both in terms of traffic volumes and road safety. The Cashmere Oaks roading network, including the intersection of Cashmere Oaks Drive and State Highway 2, can readily accommodate the anticipated increase in users. Any required changes to the roading network, including minor changes such as increased signage and changes in road markings, can be considered at the road resource consent stage rather than the change stage. Ms. Nielsen has provided evidence specifically addressing road safety. Her firm view is that the record of deaths and serious injuries in the area indicates that the current infrastructure is operating well within acceptable levels and can continue to do so as the site is developed. The appropriateness of the particular measures to be implemented may be influenced by the speed limit of State Highway 2 at the time, but are not dependent on the speed reduction. As indicated by Mr. Georgeson, Waka has recently proposed to reduce the speed limit for the stretch of State Highway 2 from Cashmere Oaks Drive north from 100 kilometres per hour down to 80 kilometres per hour. That process hasn't completed yet, and you'll have seen from the evidence of Waka there's uncertainty as to the timeline for that. If the speed limit remains at 100 kilometres per hour, there are tools that can be implemented to manage transport effects. Ms. Nielsen observes that in practice, vehicles using State Highway 2 in this area typically travel at speeds lower than 100 kilometres per hour. Mr. Connolly agrees that this reflects the reality of speeds in this area. Any reduction in the speed limit for this stretch of State Highway 2 will have safety benefits, but that is a matter for Waka Kotahi. Should a speed reduction occur prior to development of the site, it will inform what measures are required to be implemented to manage effects. These are all matters that will be appropriately considered as part of the future resource consent process, and Mr. Lewandowski has proposed more detailed matters of control regarding roading and road safety to provide further comfort that the council can provide greater scrutiny over these matters at consent stage. Critically, it's neither appropriate nor necessary for a speed limit change to be required to be implemented on State Highway 2 in order to accommodate future development of the site. The reporting planner in her report recommends decline largely on the basis of transport and road safety matters. The reporting planner considers transport effects to be unacceptable, but with respect provides no reasoning as to how that conclusion has been qualified. Council's traffic expert, Ms. Fraser, relies heavily on Waka Kotahi's submission in reaching her conclusions. Mr. Georgeson and Ms. Nielsen have considered the matters raised by the council and submitters regarding transport and road safety matters, and remain of the view that there is no transport or road safety impediment to the plan change being granted, and that transport matters can be readily addressed as part of the future consent process when the site is developed. Mr. Connolly acknowledges that the appropriateness of a range of measures proposed by Ms. Nielsen are informed by the rural or urban nature of the environment. And you'll hear more from both Mr. Georgeson and Ms. Nielsen on that rural, urban, or peri-urban nature of that area. This is an area experiencing growth and is in transition from rural to urban already. Kashmir Oak subdivision well advanced. Tools outlined by Ms. Nielsen can readily support new development, irrespective of whether the road has a rural appearance, as Kotahi suggests, without the need for a roundabout. In terms of pedestrian and cycle connectivity, there's already a well-established network within the Kashmir Oak subdivision, with a range of future further potential connection options, including a shared path across the Waikato River to the south of Kashmir Oaks and associated recreational park connectivity. And on that, on your site visit, I understand that you had a site visit yesterday. You may have seen at the southern end of the Kashmir Oaks subdivision, there has been a shared path constructed between the Kashmir Oaks subdivision and Euro Street, and so that provides another opportunity for walking or cycling or mobility scooters to head south and then move track across along Euro Street to State Highway 2 to a stretch of that highway. And you'll also hear from Mr. Georgeson on what might be potential down the track for further connectivity to the south as well.
Mark, I've got that noted. It would be good to have a good plan up available for us to get the sort of geography clear in our mind about both the existing and potential aspects.
Sorry, on that issue, we had hoped, technology permitting, for a almost virtual walkthrough of the area as well by Mr. Georgeson. So that's something that we're also hoping that we'll be able to achieve that will help with that very issue as well.
Yeah. Probably it's fair to say at the moment that some of the figures and the evidence are pretty poor and so I've signalled already, Georgia, that we might try and bring those up. We are struggling to read them up on the big screen and see if we can get some more clarity.
Certainly.
The particular figures that I've noticed before them, that just for web processing convenience, they're all squeezed down as a little and are unreadable. So you might be asking.
Absolutely.
On the screen and turn it up.
So returning to 5.9, in terms of connectivity across State Highway 2, this would be informed by the speed of State Highway 2 at the time that resource consent is sought, but at its current speed is not considered appropriate. And as explained by Mr. Georgeson, and you'll hear more from him on this particular issue, the plan change does not include a range of connectivity options, including connectivity across Highway 2 should a speed reduction occur. However, future connectivity is not required to be across that Highway 2. And on that, from your site visit, you would have seen the quite steep embankment on the eastern side of the state highway adjacent to Cashmere Oaks. Ms. Newson's evidence is that 1.1 DSI crashes would be anticipated for the intersection in the 20-year period, and that is well short of being considered a high-risk intersection, one identified as having 12 or more DSI crashes in the same 20-year period. So that's an order of magnitude difference. While the evidence for Waka Kotahi and the council make out that there is a critical issue and that risk is unacceptable, this seems to be driven by Waka Kotahi's Road to Zero strategy, rather than grounded in any resource management basis and fails to consider the real-world context of the site and area. The Road to Zero strategy is one of a range of government strategies that inform the government policy statement on land transport. GPS Land Transport is a key document under the Land Transport Act that provides direction on strategic priorities for Waka Kotahi and how funding is allocated to achieve the goals identified in initiatives such as Road to Zero. And as you'll appreciate, there are a range of government policy statements on other matters, including on housing and urban development, for example, which does include specific provision for aged care. While the Road to Zero strategy does not have direct statutory weight, it is relevant to Waka Kotahi's decision making and therefore understandably colours its position as a submitter through this plan change process. Somerset acknowledges Waka Kotahi's Road to Zero strategy and supports the general intent behind the strategy, but it is an aspirational document and should not be given significant weight in considering effects under the RMA, particularly as to what road safety effects are acceptable. The hearing panel is not bound to accept or reject aspects of the plan change where it is, for example, inconsistent with the Road to Zero strategy.
Yeah. So just a question there, Mr. Mahana, and it's a question, I guess, also for Ms. Connor and Mr. Pullen. Is the Road to Zero strategy and the GPS lane transport matters that we can consider under Section 74? You said that it's not a RMA statutory document, and I accept that. But just wondering, solely to the makes and the draft district plan, where it fits into the equation.
Certainly. And if I can come back to more detail on the specific hook, but essentially, like the makes in the draft district plan, those are matters that can be considered. They are not mandatory relevant considerations, though, and it does become a question.
Thank you.
So 514, RMA is not a no effects statute. There are effects resulting from any activity, and it is not appropriate nor practical to avoid every effect. Mr. Connolly for Waka Kotahi suggested a structure plan is required, but does not provide any clear view as to what measures would be acceptable, even acknowledging that a roundabout is not necessarily the only solution. In his view, potential safety management treatments to the road network outlined in Ms. Newson's evidence will not make a fundamental or substantial improvement to road safety. And with respect, that is not the correct threshold against which to assess the plan change. Somerset is not required to make improvements to road safety as part of this plan change, as against the status quo, nor any future resource consent process under the RMA, but rather to manage adverse effects. While that may be part of Waka Kotahi's Road to Zero strategy, the DSI 1.1 in 20 years' time does not require fundamental intersection redesign, nor does it provide a basis for declining this plan change, particularly given that it represents an incremental increase on the existing transport safety environment. And importantly, the DSI tools, and you'll hear from Ms. Nielsen on this, they are crude in the sense that they are national averages and an aggregation of all the national statistics. And so they fail to consider site-specific aspects, as well as failing to consider, for example, technological advancements, mode shift, and do not factor in the other mitigation measures proposed by Somerset. So the comparisons between the T intersection and a roundabout are generic to any old T intersection and any old roundabout. And importantly, the T intersection assessment is it doesn't have the ability to take into account any of the further mitigation measures proposed by Ms. Nielsen, for example. Those simply aren't factored in. And so Ms. Nielsen will be able to take you through that in more detail. So at 5:15, if any increase in road safety risk was considered unacceptable and warranted decline of a plan change request or consent application, in reality, most, if not any, new subdivision would not be able to proceed, including the recent Passionate Oak subdivision, and that doesn't reflect reality. The recent amendments to the RMA through the Resource Management Enabling Housing Supply Amendment Act recognise their effects that come with enabling more development. The immediate legal effect of medium density residential standards, which allow 3 houses of 3 stories to be developed on most residential sites as a permitted activity for Tier 1 councils, are a prime example of this. High density development and infill development has been enabled without any corresponding infrastructure upgrades. That results in more users on existing transport networks without any upgrades or a consent process to manage those effects and road safety effects that have not been considered or managed. And that is a reflection of, again, reality rather than an aspirational policy. Somerset acknowledges that Waka Kotahi does not have limitless funding and therefore needs to carefully consider where across New Zealand it invests in network improvements. However, in our submission, that does not mean that a no-risk approach should be taken to any proposals for development by the private sector. It seems, in essence, that Waka Kotahi's position is that the only way that plan change can proceed is if there is a reduction in the DSI. And so that does not, in our submission, reflect the framework that you as the hearing panel are required to make this decision. Rather, when considered appropriately in context, there is no transport safety issue that warrants decline of the plan change. Somerset acknowledges that traffic matters will require consideration through any subsequent resource consent, and the amended provisions provide a robust framework for any subsequent decision maker to appropriately consider transport and transport safety matters. And that includes also a requirement for financial contribution for transport upgrades on any subdivision or land use consents. Now, Ms. Saint-Amand provided some comments about whether there was a gap in the financial contribution rule. You'll hear from Mr. Lewandowski on that. He has a different view, considers that it does appropriately in its current form catch a retirement village land use consent application. To the extent that the panel were concerned about that, we can certainly look at drafting to provide greater certainty on that, but our view is that it is provided for through the framework.
You're now going to move on to a different topic, aren't you?
Yes.
We've got a couple of questions on traffic.
Certainly.
And some of them will probably be best answered by Mr. Lewandowski and Mr. Georgeson. But I'll put them to you and they can be forwarded. 5.6 of your submissions say, should a speed reduction occur prior to the development of the site, it will inform what measures are required to be implemented to manage effects, and that will be part of a resource agency process. And Mr. Lewandowski will provide some details on that. We'll hear about those shortly. Conversely, though, if speed reduction doesn't occur prior to development or prior to a resource consent being lodged and considered, assuming the plan change is approved, does that mean, are you suggesting that the same criteria that Mr. Lewandowski is proposing will be applicable, or a different set of criteria?
The same criteria, and you'll see in my 5.5, again, if the speed limit remains at 100 kilometres an hour, there are tools that can be used. So the intention with the plan provisions is to ensure that they are future-proofed, if you like, in that they can operate irrespective of the speed environment. We are very cognizant of the decision about what the appropriate speed treatment is for that stretch of State Highway 2 being a matter for Wakatahi. It's under legislation. It is the outcome of that is what the environment is resource consent application. In our submission, that reinforces why making a decision now about a particular treatment, so whether a roundabout, for example, has to be mandated at this stage, is inappropriate because we don't know at the resource consent stage what that speed limit will be in that environment, for example.
Just on the speed reduction, and apologies, I can't recall the name of the process or document that has signalled that. Mr. Georgeson might be able to help me.
ISMP.
Yes. ISMP. Thank you. Is that a public process?
So it is in the sense that there is consultation. So there has been consultation, and so Somerset did make a submission, for example, in relation to that. And so as I think it may have been Ms. Bates in her evidence outlined that consultation is completed, but as I understand it, the final decision hasn't been made yet, and the process for any implementation hasn't been confirmed. And so that's why Wakatahi, I understand in their evidence say we don't know, it can take a lot of time, we don't know yet what the time frame is for that. Yes. And so that's why there hasn't been reliance placed
with the area to the south between the 50k and the 100.
No, and so you'd have heard the evidence from our witnesses that explain that presumably that will either be an extension of the 50 or a continuation of the 80, but it can't imagine a world in which you would have from Kashmir Oaks north being 80, but then a 100 kilometre strip for all of 50 metres or something before it goes to 50. So I'm sure you may hear further from Wakatahi witnesses on that issue, for example.
Yes, I'm asking that question partly to allude to that question, and Mr. Ahmed, or one of the traffic safety engineers might be able to update us on that. You mentioned that Somerset had made a submission. What was the nature of that submission to that document?
So it was to support a speed reduction, but to suggest that a lower speed reduction would be, from memory, that lower speed reduction to 50 would be appropriate.
In the area between the 50 and the current 100?
No, for the stretch that was being considered by Wakatahi, and that is perhaps one of the reasons for the evidence. Again, I think it was a mistake suggesting that there wasn't scope within that consultation process for other proposals to be considered. So essentially, the proposal was to reduce it to 80. It couldn't, as a result of that consultation, reduce it below that through that process. It would have to be a subsequent process for that.
Yes. And was that scope issue raising the spatial extent of the change also?
I would imagine her evidence would deal with the same issue as well. Yes. And that it's, as I understand it, it's a change between the status quo and what was proposed, what was put out for consultation, and so it's limited by that as far as the range of options that could result from that process.
Okay, so if there was to be any further adjustment of the speed between the 50k and the current 100 between south of Oaks Drive back to the
50 odd metre stretch.
Yeah. Is it your understanding that it could be a separate process?
No, I'm not sure on that issue. I would have expected that as a matter of practicality, that would have been addressed at the same time.
Providing the scope.
The scope question, I guess, goes to what terms of Waikato internal policy and processes, guide the process that they are guided by.
Yes.
But I would have expected that talking about Cashmere Oaks Drive is not specifically exactly where Cashmere Oaks Drive meets State Highway 2, but reflects at Cashmere Oaks Drive essentially is where the speed limit currently changed from 50 to 100. And so it's looking at that, essentially extending the urban lower reduced speed limit area further north.
Thank you for that. I guess if nothing else, State and others, I'll notice that these are questions that we're putting to them.
Certainly.
So we just have one final question to Mr. Mechanic on transported. You said, and I wrote it down, that you understood Waka Kotahi's position to be that the plan change could only proceed if there's a reduction in the DSI. Just understanding the nexus in that. When you say a reduction in the DSI, are you suggesting that through an intervention, through either a roundabout or a speed reduction? Because you've said that the reduction in the DSI is crude, to use your terms. It's based on national averages. It doesn't take into account local situations or modal shifts, technology changes. What's the measure? We know what the measure is. What's the elements that give rise to that reduction? That could give rise to that reduction.
Sure. So, and this is our understanding of what seems to be driving Waka's position. There is essentially that there needs to be a reduction in DSI, and so that is why they're saying a roundabout delivers that compared to a TS section. A reduction in speed absolutely would deliver that, but we understand Waka Kotahi's position to be that it isn't prepared to contemplate a speed reduction below 80 for that area. And so there's seems to be a chicken and egg situation, and that the speed reduction would address the situation, but Waka Kotahi seems to not be willing to consider that without urbanisation of that area, which requires a roundabout, which would result in a speed limit, which would mean that a roundabout isn't necessary. So it does seem to be a little bit circular, I guess, with respect as far as our reading of where Waka Kotahi is coming from.
Yes. Clearly reading my notes, so I've written down chicken and egg situation. So. Okay, thank you for that. Thanks for the indulgence.
Yes, thanks for that, David. Just one other question I will want to understand from the Waka Kotahi team, and it's probably in this state, I think, is the general length of decision making under the ISMP. Is that right? ISMP. My own community has been a fair bit of grief about speed limits on State Highway 5 and making the Taupo. That process, I think, was went through in less than a year from notification to the decision. So, just in terms of our timeframes on this, some indication about is there any statutory timeframes on decision making, and if not, what is the general course of events? You know, I think Warwick would have been through one of these with the area in the north of Featherston. So again, just understanding the timeframes of notification, consultation, and decision making. You know, what is reasonable. So that's one issue. And the other issue for the Waka Kotahi team, Daniel's put words in your mouth. And I haven't seen this actually written down so clearly, but he said that the Waka Kotahi position is that the only way the plan change can proceed is by facilitating a reduction in the DSI tax.
That's our understanding.
And whether that can be confirmed as your position when you get to your case, that would be helpful. We don't need it now. If you could just come back to us when you present. And again, it's difficult if we're reading around trying to look at a screen. Yeah, just those couple of points. And Liam, is that for you to just come back to us and acknowledge?
Yes, thank you, sir. Yeah, me and my team will come back to you on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Thank you, Daniel.
Excellent. So we'll move on to the next topic now, which is the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land. And do also agree with the comment by Commissioner McMahon that this will be one of the early decisions. There have been at least one, if not more, other private land change applications considered in the context of the NPS HPL. But it is certainly, we don't have the benefit of, for example, Environment Corp guidance on this.
That was a first instance decision. Are you able to supply that?
Yes, we can.
Just out of interest, may you ask where it was?
It was in Collie, and so we can provide the detail. I think Mr. Allen in particular will be able to provide some commentary on that as well. So the National Policy Statement on Highly Productive Land was in development for a considerable period of time, with initial consultation with the public on the proposed version of it taking place in 2019. Further progress was delayed due to COVID. The plan change request documents considered the proposed NPS HPL in its draft form. And prior to submitting the plan change request, Somerset obtained a soil assessment from AgFirst to ascertain the productive capabilities of the site. From the testing that took place, AgFirst identified the site's land use capability as Class 3. Mrs. Allen and Milner are clear that the site soil, while technically captured by the NPS HPL, are the lowest quality soil class that is captured under the NPS, and there are significant constraints to utilising the site for productive purposes. The plan change included an assessment against the draft as it existed at that time. Subsequently, the National Policy Statement was released on the 20th of September and came into force on the 17th of October. There are subtle differences between the draft and finalised National Policy Statements, which Somerset has addressed on direction from the hearing panel and the statements of evidence from Mrs. Lewandowski, Allen and Heath. In our submission, the plan change satisfies the requirements of the NPS HPL. The evidence of Mrs. Lewandowski, Allen and Heath outlines how the plan change complies with the criteria, particularly clauses 3.6, 4 and 5 of the National Policy Statement, which I've outlined there. So the National Policy Statement has differing thresholds for Tier 1 and 2 councils versus Tier 3 councils, which Masterton is, and so sets out a 4 there, 3 criteria, and then subclause 5 is also relevant. So taking you through each of these in turn.
And before you do that, I'm a bit intrigued by this HPL for a number of reasons. One of them is that there are different, well, I'm interested in your use of the term captured by in your 6.2.
Yes.
The land's captured by them. It's pretty good way of describing it. So on the 17th of October, we will change for planning regimes, and a lot of people have invested lots and lots of money in proposals and not any sort of recognition of that. I understand that in the plan there's no savings for processes and or proposals and process. Is that your understanding?
There are some limited exceptions. So, for example, where land, where there was a plan change that had been progressed by a council rather than a private plan change, that is one example. Another one is where the land had been identified in a strategic planning document. And so that goes to this question of the mugs, for example, which isn't considered a strategic planning document. So while this land is identified within the mugs, it wasn't saved from being captured by the NPS HPL as a result of that. And so there are very limited exceptions, and so absolutely agree with you that there have been a number of proposals around the country that have been in process and have been significantly affected by the way in which the UPS HPL has required further consideration of particular matters, created additional thresholds for urbanisation, and can certainly provide further submissions on the UPS HPL and how it operates. But essentially, it imposes obligations on those councils to undertake mapping exercises, and then there are provisions that essentially provide interim protection and create thresholds for any urbanisation in advance.
Understand that. I've looked everywhere at that, yes, in another context. I'm well aware of that, but really can help me with. The thing I'm intrigued about particularly is that there's different rules for tier 1, 2 and 3 councils.
Yes.
And it seems to me what the evidence you're providing to us in the legal position that the tier 3 councils have an extra exception that we can go to.
Well, there are different provisions that apply for tier 1 and 2 versus tier 3.
Absolutely. But all liberal with the tier 3. It's as you said, because you can go to the clause 3.6.4 process, can't you?
Yes, that's 3.6.4 does provide a specific avenue for tier 3 councils. That's correct.
And what I find intriguing is that I find this counterintuitive that I would have thought that high growth areas tier 1 and 2 would have more justification to perhaps expand onto some of this small tier 3 councils that don't have the same growth direction, have more ability to take advantage of 3.6.4.
Sure, I think.
Can you explain in your mind why that might be?
In my mind, one of the reasons is that tier 1 and 2 councils are high growth councils by definition, and that therefore the councils most likely, or the areas most likely to be experiencing the urban sprawl or the pressures being placed on the potential urbanisation of productive land. And that is why, especially in the context of the additional requirements under the NPSUD on those councils, it's intended to go, actually, it's not all about going out, particularly for those tier 1 and 2 councils, and because the NPSUD is certainly about trying to drive greater intensification of those tier 1 and 2 councils. So that's one way that I can see it reconciled, because I agree on first glance it does seem potentially a bit counterintuitive that there's less pressure or there's less a greater opportunity for tier 3 councils. But I think in that lens where it's saying this is about interim protection and these issues are being felt most keenly in the areas in the hinterland surrounding tier 1 and 2 councils, and that's where there's the greatest need for interim protection.
Yes. Okay. But given the avoid policies for tier 1 and 2, this was the tier 1 and 2 council, the proposition would be in trouble, wouldn't it?
I expect it could well, and there might be. I haven't looked at that possibility, but I expect that it would be additional challenges, yes.
Yes. The interim process of recapping. Okay, no, that's just helpful. It's just discuss these things with other practitioners.
Yeah, and I'll certainly reflect on it further, and if I do have any other submissions on that, we'll certainly come back to you on those. But yeah, certainly, I guess the simple explanation though is that we do have a specific, quite discrete pathway that makes all of our collective lives easier as far as focusing our attention.
And just one question, and it's I think it's a simple yes or no, but is there any doubt that the site doesn't meet the criteria for highly productive land in 3.61?
So
I've read the evidence of Mr. Milner and Mr. Allen.
The challenge is that there is a difference between what a council subsequently map as being highly productive land versus the interim protection. And so I think you would have seen from some of our evidence that through the subsequent council mapping exercise, that could very well be that this is not identified as highly productive land, which I think is your point. Absolutely. We are in an interim position. There is the interim protection, and so there is then this particular gateway that is what you need to visit.
So in the absence of specific mapping, really the land use classification system trumps everything. Correct. Notwithstanding Mr. Milner and Mr. Allen.
It trumps everything in the sense that you are captured and in this framework. But when you look at the framework, and I'll take you through it shortly, those factors are absolutely relevant as far as this land is essentially at the very, very bottom end of that spectrum of highly productive land. And so that is relevant both in terms of the cost side of things and the criteria study, as well as when you're looking at what other reasonably practicable options there are and looking at what the LUC of productivity of those alternative sites might be as well. So it is still absolutely relevant, the fact that this is only clinging on by its fingernails to be considered highly productive land.
Okay. The reason I asked that question, Mr. Mechanic, is that 3.6.1 lists 3 criteria that are conjunctive to meet the criteria of highly productive land. First is that it's in the rural primary production zone. Second, that it's predominantly LUC class 3. And thirdly, that it forms part of a large and geographically cohesive area.
Sure.
Are you accepting that all 3 of you?
Let me come back to you on that point, and I'll also ask Mr. Allen in particular to address you on that.
Yes. Assuming it's captured fair and square, then obviously the evidence of Milner and Allen goes to that last criteria about the loss of productive land and balancing between enabling growth and
certainly, and our case has, I guess, it's conservative in the manner in which it's been presented, and that it assumes that it is captured, and so looks to find a way through the criteria.
Okay. Do you agree that they are conjunctive?
Agree, yes. So clause, going through each of those criteria, first clause 3.6.4a about sufficient development capacity. The evidence of Mr. Heath considers the Masterton district and Carterton district markets together as one catchment due to the proximity of both Masterton and the site to Carterton. Carterton and Masterton are already undersupplied with retirement units, with this deficiency set to increase. And the market will have a shortfall of approximately 240 retirement units by as early as next year. In fact, those numbers set to increase over time. So he forecasts significant housing shortages in the area of aged care housing, that the increase in supply resulting from the plan change will improve housing affordability, the well-being of the local community, and land use efficiencies, thus meeting that criterion. On the second criterion about other reasonably practicable and feasible options, the second limb is whether there are reasonably practical and feasible options for providing the required development capacity for a comprehensive. In our submission, this encompasses 2 relevant aspects: productive viability of the site and how the site compares to other development options for development capacity. In relation to the productive viability of the site, Mr. Allen has considered the site's physical characteristics, current use, and other future uses. In terms of physical characteristics, the size of the site presents limitations to successfully sustaining pastoral agricultural use. This aspect of the site cannot be remedied through expansion due to the fragmentation on surrounding sites and the incompatibility of other land uses. Soil fertility is low, require fertilizer application at significant cost. Soil naturally has poor drainage and requires significant drainage upgrades to address this. You have heard from this, well, you have seen Mr. Milner's evidence that suggests that the nature of the soil is a permanent issue in terms of its productivity. The site is bordered by residential activities to the south and lifestyle blocks surrounding the eastern and northern boundary. Mr. Allen reiterates in his evidence that the land uses contemplated above involve significant use of agrochemicals such as herbicides and pesticides that may be at risk of drifting onto residential sites and creating a sensitivity. To reach this overall conclusion, Mr. Allen considered a range of productive uses for the site and their viability: pastoral, horticultural, and overall, he concludes that pastoral farming would be the most appropriate, but the small site size is a barrier to viability. And I don't think Mr. Milner is more emphatic on that. The council engaged Mr. Milner to provide soil evidence, which was provided earlier this week. Mr. Milner differs in the LUC sub-classification of the site to Mr. Allen, but they are in agreement that irrespective of the LUC classification, the site suffers from physical constraints that affect its productive viability. And I've asked Mr. Allen to specifically address that question of how they've reached different sub-classifications and whether that bears any significance to your consideration. And in particular, Mr. Milner agrees that the site is constrained in terms of soil drainage, site size, irrigation, and reverse sensitivity. Overall, Mr. Milner concludes that these limitations are both permanent and unavoidable, which reinforces the evidence of Mr. Allen in relation to the above considerations. Somerset has actively considered a range of other sites in the area that use critical criteria for supporting a retirement village, as outlined in Mr. Snell's evidence. These include the minimum lot size of 8 to 10 hectares, and it's rare to find sites appropriate for retirement villages in urbanised environments and with features needed support. And so Mr. Smale addresses that. In order to address the second limit of 364 test, Mr. Heath also carried out an extensive alternative location assessment of 6 residentially zoned sites in Masterton physically suitable to accommodate a retirement village. However, none were appropriate due to them being under development, part of a treaty settlement, subdivided, or proposed not to be residentially zoned. And so, while Mr. Smale's evidence talked about Somerset's efforts to identify a site and its particular demands or criteria that it considers, Mr. Heath's assessment is importantly agnostic of whether there is a willing seller. It's also agnostic of any Somerset specific criteria. It's about a retirement village unit in the general sense, just to avoid any concern that there's some sort of higher threshold that Somerset is setting that is becomes self-serving in the context. Other sites that were considered and out of the residential zone were either less economically viable due to proximity to infrastructure and transport, or of a higher LUC class, and higher in the sense of being more productive, so a lower LUC number. Therefore, there were no other feasible sites that would provide the required development capacity that were of a lower productive value. And so that in our submission means that the second criterion is satisfied. Then the third matter relates to environmental, social, cultural, and economic benefits and costs. And so to successfully utilise the site for productive purposes, there are significant barriers due to the physical characteristics of the site and its location. Mr. Heath, with reference to the evidence of Mr. Allen, has provided a detailed cost-benefit analysis and concludes the benefits outweigh the costs. Specifically, there will be increased land and dwelling supply, an increase in affordable housing, increased variety and choice of housing type and location, increased amenity, increased economic investment, decreased marginal infrastructure costs, greater levels of growth, and an increased diversity of the biopool. Mr. Lewandowski considers that increased land supply for development is an environmental benefit that outweighs any potential negative environmental effects associated with change. Social benefits associated with the plan change, in particular with regard to the increase in retirement housing, outweigh any negative social effects. No negative social effects have been expressly identified in relation to the plan change. And from engagement with iwi, there have also been no cultural costs or benefits. So those are the three criteria that in particular guide your consideration. There is also clause 3.65 that relates to the spatial extent of urban rezoning as the minimum necessary to provide the required development capacity while achieving a well-functioning environment. 618, the plan change seeks to rezone the entirety of the site, as is illustrated in the plan submitted with the plan change request. The proposed retirement village will utilise approximately 19 hectares of the site, so the vast majority of it. The balance of the site could be utilised as standard residential subdivision and development under the general residential zone controls. To only rezone the portion of the site used by the retirement village would be efficient, as it prevents the proposed residential development capacity for the remaining part of the site. Leaving the small site zone with rural primary production exacerbates its existing constraints, as outlined in the evidence from Mr. Allen, would increase fragmentation of the area, which already has a mix of rural lifestyle and residential uses. Mr. Heath considers that leaving the balance of the site does not assist with achieving good economic outcomes, considering the site currently has limitations for rural and highly productive uses. To not rezone the whole site would exacerbate these limitations. Rezoning the whole site functioning environment is achieved, is limiting the potential, limiting the rezoning to the lot allocated for retirement village units not only create potential reverse sensitivity effects, it has no economic justification. And just adding to that, there could be a question of, well, could you relocate the retirement village component to a different part of the site to avoid it otherwise being an island? And so Mr. Smale can address you on that as far as the extent of it, and also in terms of ensuring that potential future connectivity north, the placement of it is limited by that as well. So there are those sort of aspects as well that are also relevant to your consideration of what is necessary to ensure a well-functioning urban environment results.
Okay, Daniel, thank you for that. It's been an interesting morning. Aaron, when you do talk about the site layout, in having a really clear plan, I think is something we should maybe point us to, and we can actually think about the features we will develop as an efficient development perspective. Sure. Thank you. So we'll be back again at 11:15. Thank you. Thank you.
Teams on hold or 15 minutes? Oh, shouldn't be. Oh, that side one goes to the kitchen.
Oh, okay, so yeah,
You can go outside there if you need a breakout.
I
Yes.
thought there was a breakout.
No, unfortunately, that goes to the kitchen. So we can go either north or.
I was just thinking, we could put this in front of them, and then I can have Teams on here and share. If I can connect to the projector and share if needed.
Great idea.
And then it'll be louder. They'll be able to see them better.
Yes, I've just got an email from Liam at Welhom saying
Too
not sure
quiet.
if it's fixable or not, but his commissioners are quite stuttery. So yeah, we could. We just have to keep an eye on the battery on that one once it's unplugged.
Yeah.
Put a table in front of them to aim the camera at them.
Sorry.
Oh, been there 45 minutes and Raven's Oh, you're right.
My people are
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit slow on the Haywards, but I thought I was going to be here before 9 and I had been coming into us.
They're doing a lot of work.
I don't know what they're doing, they must have been stopping the traffic.
Yeah.
Drop that down on the
Better?
Yeah.
Let me just check if I can hear. Can you hear better now? Thumbs up, maybe.
Well, it's a bit more specialised. Yes, thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, no.
Okay, everyone, we're back with the new improved system. We can see everyone online now. Can't see half the room, but we'll cope with that. And I think David has one question of your last couple of paragraphs, Daniel, so I'll hand over to him.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mahinik. I understand the three-step test for the Tier 3 councils. I'm particularly interested in that overriding test at the end about making sure that the spatial extent of the rezoning is the minimum necessary to provide for development capacity. So there's obviously a link between that and the first test about having sufficient capacity. And you've drawn our attention to Mr. Heath's analysis, which seems to be squarely on retirement village statistics and the demand for those. Given that the plan change would provide development of the entirety of the 15.7 hectares, what I'm interested in is the demand analysis for residential development per se within the catchment.
Sure.
I presume because it's a Tier 3 authority, they haven't done what's known as a HBA, a housing and business assessment.
And so
Just before you answer that, Glenn, I think it is. I think your speaker's on, so we can hear you. You just turn your speaker off.
Back up. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, and certainly understand the question and had anticipated that may come, and Mr. Heath will be addressing that as well.
Good.
It is a situation where Mr. Heath's assessment has focused on retirement because that is the objective of the plan change, and that is where there is evidence from Mr. Heath is very clear on that. In terms of general residential housing supply, there isn't the same level of demand. And so Mr. Heath can explain that in a little bit more detail. So there isn't the pronounced demand aspect, but in my submission, having established that there is the retirement village need and then looking at how that can be provided, and given also your need to, in providing for that supply, to also ensure that there is a well-functioning urban environment. In my submission, the rezoning of the balance of the site does still meet that test as being the minimum necessary in order to provide for that, while still also ensuring a well-functioning urban environment. So avoiding it being, because of the shape of the site and things like that, the need to ensure potential for connectivity north, all of those factors mean that rezoning the entire site is required in order to meet that requirement in 365.
Yes. But at this point, we're largely reliant on supply and demand analysis for retirement villages.
Correct. Correct.
Are you aware of any analysis that the district council have done, either district councils, in terms of demand for residential living generally? Does the MUG study assist in any way?
So I think that would be a question for Mr. Heath and or Mr. Lewandowski. So there is the draft plan as an example, which does propose additional residential areas to be rezoned. So yeah, I will leave that to those witnesses. Yes.
Yeah. Now the reason I asked that question is because of the link between Lim 1 and then that clause 5. So I think Mr. Georgeson and Mr. Lewandowski look at what might happen if there was a complete development of residential, and I think some numbers, 294 units, I think rings a bell. if there was no retirement village. 254, yeah.
And in my submission, that analysis is for a different purpose, and so the evidence you have before you is that there is a critical shortage of the retirement village land, and so that should be enabled. In terms of the manner in which that is occurring and the planning tool being used, it is through residential zoning because it is a residential activity with it specifically being provided for.
Yes.
But in order to ensure that you are looking at a worst case scenario from a transport perspective,
yes.
While absolutely it is required to be rezoned in this manner to provide supply for retirement village, hypothetically, there could be the potential for it to be developed for general residential. And so in terms of a prudent worst case scenario conservative assessment, that's why that assessment has been utilised. But we're not seeking to demonstrate that there is demand.
I understand that. All I was indicating was perhaps a lack of analysis in terms of that first limb for activities other than the retirement village. And I guess that I'm not trying to be critical, but what that brings the focus really on subclause 5 then, in terms of that overall assessment of if you're going to do it, keep it to an absolute minimum.
Correct.
Assuming the demand is uncontested for retirement villages, that in itself justifies the 9 hectares. Doesn't necessarily justify the 5.7 hectares of the remainder of the zone. You've talked about why you would include the other zone because of reverse sensitivity type issues, but that may not be sufficient in the overall analysis. So I'm just expecting a little bit more on that, particularly as there may be, and this is something I want to put on the table early, so that everyone has a chance to respond to it. There may be grounds for having a recommendation go forward that recommends a reduced area to be rezoned, based primarily on transportation effects, so that the demand, the transportation volumes are reduced and relate only to the retirement village. It's a very hypothetical proposition, but I think it's important to get it there because I want to ask Waka Kotahi questions about traffic volumes and whether that is a potential solution over and above speed reductions and roundabout interventions. So I'm sure you and your client will have an answer to that, but I wanted to share that as a possibility to understand what the practical implications of that are. Understand the reverse sensitivity response to that, but I'm not understanding the demand imperative for including the 5.7 hectares.
Sure, no, I understand that. Excellent. We'll move on to section 7 of my submissions now, which addresses the national policy statements on urban development. So the NPSUD seeks to ensure that well-functioning urban environments are established to meet the ever-changing needs of New Zealand communities. The NPSUD removes overly restrictive barriers to development to allow for intensification, specifically in locations that have good access to services and infrastructure. Within the NPSUD, each area and specific council are identified as being part of a 3-tier system, with larger councils being considered Tier 1. Masterton, mentioned earlier, is a Tier 3 authority. It's held to a different standard to Tier 1 and 2 authorities. However, these Tier 3 councils are strongly encouraged to do things Tier 1 and Tier 2 authorities are obliged to do under Part 3 of the NPSUD. As supported by the evidence of Mr. Lewandowski, the plan change is consistent with the NPSUD and makes a significant contribution to the housing need of the districts. Rezoning the land for residential use will support the competitive operation of land in the districts, which again will have flow-on effects, for example, for housing affordability, and is beneficial for all members of the community, not just the elderly. Further additional development capacity is advocated for under Policy A to the NPSUD, which councils must be responsive. The NPSUD recognises that development capacity may not be anticipated by RMA documents and it may be out of sequence with planned land release. It should give the hearing panel comfort that the NPSUD has considered that development capacity should be utilised in scenarios where it's not already being provided for by district or regional plans. In our submission, the plan change seeks to bring forward the urbanisation of the site, which has long been anticipated by the council. The Environment Court has acknowledged the importance of urban planning documents and objectives and stated in relation to the implementation of the NPS urban development capacity. So that's the NPS that preceded the NPSUD. The decision makers have been directed to consider urban growth outcomes, which in the past have been overlooked as a result of the emphasis on local environment and amenity considerations. The court stated that a more future-orientated, outcome-focused conclusion was envisaged. This approach in our submission has carried through in the NPSUD. Matters of concern are whether the plan change is consistent with the NPSUD in relation to connectivity and integration of the surrounding area. In our submission, these issues have been adequately addressed through the, in particular, the evidence of Mr. Lewandowski. And going to Commissioner McMahon's earlier comments about the well-functioning urban environment point, as well as the reverse sensitivity aspects, the whole concept of well-functioning urban environments is grounded within the NPSUD. And so to the extent that you're considering that concept, the NPSUD is where it is grounded, where it is defined, and those objectives provide a lot of colour as far as what is anticipated in that respect. And again, I'm sure Mr. Heath and Mr. Lewandowski will be able to address you on that. Moving on to landscape and visual amenity. In our submission, the plan change is a logical extension to the surrounding residential development and abutting urban area in line with the Cashmere Oak subdivision. Landscape visual matters have been thoroughly considered and appropriately addressed by Mr. Bentley. In relation to effects, Mr. Bentley states that while the proposed residential development for a retirement village will initially create moderate adverse landscape effects during the construction phase, over time, with the establishment of the appropriate landscape and planting, will assist with those effects. The adverse visual effects considered to be low or very low. The officer's report has identified that there will be a significant change to the character and amenity of the site as a result of the rezoning. The purpose, or the council has engaged Ms. MacArthur to assist it in its Section 42A requirements. Ms. MacArthur recommends planting of all boundaries of the site. While Mr. Bentley agrees that planting should be established on the northern boundary of the site, he disagrees with the need to plant all boundaries due to this leading to a greater disconnect between residential areas and the need for ongoing maintenance to prevent other issues. Ms. MacArthur agrees that the character of the area will change because of the plan change and agrees with Mr. Bentley's assessment that the plan change is a logical extension to the residential subdivision to the south. Submitters have raised concerns in relation to a range of landscape and visual matters. In our submission, all of these matters have been adequately assessed and all effects have been appropriately dealt with. These submissions and ones. Moving to engineering and infrastructure. In our submission, the site is suitable for the change in zoning as sought by the plan change and can readily accommodate the required infrastructure for the proposed future development to the standards required by the council, including earthworks and 3 water system infrastructure. Mr. Brents considers these matters can be appropriately addressed in detail during the resource consent and engineering approval processes rather than at the change stage. Council civil engineering expert Mr. Rose is largely aligned with Mr. Brents that civil engineering matters can be addressed at the resource consenting stage prior to residential development. One concern raised by Mr. Rose was potable water supply pressure to the site, but this can be readily accommodated through the use of private booster pumps at the development stage. Other concerns raised by submitters regarding wastewater and water supply have been carefully considered by Mr. Brents and addressed in his evidence.
Just on that, Mr. Mahanick, would we expect the booster pump matter to be dealt with as part of the plan change or the resource consent or through detailed design?
So in terms of the plan change stage, I guess again it goes there, is there a fundamental issue, or do the existing plan provisions and or the plan change provisions provide a sufficient and appropriate framework for that to be considered at the later stage?
Yes, and that's a question for Mr. Lewandowski.
Correct. In my submission, those do provide for it. It is common with subdivision or land use consent applications for the infrastructure, making sure that there is Three Waters servicing to be considered at that stage.
Yes.
And so that is commonplace. We've got multiple other projects at that stage that have those considerations being considered at that stage and the detail. And so some of that is at consent stage, but again, the engineering plan approval or detailed design is when there's further level of detail and further expert involvement from the council to ensure that the relevant standards are provided.
I think that's where Mr. Lewandowski's mechanical description of how the standards work will be useful.
And I think Mr. Brent will be able to assist you as well as far as things like firefighting standards and how those end up applying and what are mandatory requirements, what are built into the subdivision standards and like under the district plan.
One of the reasons I asked that question was one of the ways that pumping matter could manifest itself would be through a precondition on development occurring. I don't know if that's necessary. We need to understand what the matters of discretion at subdivision and land use are to answer that.
Certainly. So moving on to planning. So the first question about weighting of the mugs and the draft combined Wairarapa district plan. In our submission, these are relevant considerations when assessing the plan change. While non-statutory documents, while both are non-statutory documents, they do have a role to play in the consideration of the plan change. Firstly, the mugs, it's never been formally adopted by the council, but as stated in Mr. Lewandowski's evidence, the council has advised that the mugs is to be treated as a technical document. In our submission, the mugs provides useful insight as to what is anticipated for the area in relation to urban development. Similarly, the draft plan provides useful planning context and insight into the council's considerations regarding urban development. When read together, the mugs and the district plan are aligned in contemplating urban growth to the north of Masterton and site. And I will come back to you in terms of that section 74 specific question as well.
Yes, look, that's pretty important, I think, because you're making a submission to us in 10.1 that we can bring this into our decision making. We just need to know the legal pathway for us to do that. So will you deal with that tomorrow morning or?
As soon as possible. So no later than tomorrow morning.
Okay. I think tomorrow morning will be fine. Let's kick off with that because it relates on the other side to the Waka Kotahi documents and other non-RMA documents that have been through approval processes as well.
Indeed.
So it is an important point.
Yes, certainly understand that.
Yeah.
And just on the question of weighting, while in a slightly different category, the other aspect is you would have seen the submission by Greater Wellington Regional Council that talks about plan change 1 to the RPS. And so that is an RMA document. And you would have seen Mr. Lewandowski's discussion of that in his evidence. That is at the earliest stages of that process. And so you'll both be familiar with proposed plans and the weight to be given to those, and so increasing over time as they move through a process. So in my submission, that plan change, while clearly a relevant document to consider, is to be given a little weight or limited weight.
Yes, and the test, unlike the operative RPS, where we must give effect to it, the test with the proposed RPS is to have regard to it.
Correct. And the other aspect is, in any event, that is being considered by Mr. Lewandowski and isn't considered to be an impediment again. So it is something to be considered, to be had regard to, but it's not seen as creating any fundamental issue either. Moving on to the further changes to the plan change provisions addressed in Mr. Lewandowski's, well, in response to the submitted evidence. So Mr. Lewandowski in his evidence has considered Ms. Barr's recommended amendments to the plan change provisions and has proposed further amendments to those provisions in his evidence in response to Ms. Barr. This includes more prescriptive matters of control regarding transport and road safety effects, which provide further comfort to the hearing panel that those matters can be appropriately addressed as part of the future resource consent process. Somerset's position is that the controlled activity status is appropriate for a retirement village on the site and is consistent with the approach taken with comparable plan changes and developments, such as the Greytown Orchards development. Ms. Saitaman considers that a controlled activity status does not proportionately respond to the significant resource management issues the plan change request raises. The evidence before the hearing panel and my submission is clear that there are no significant resource management issues that cannot be addressed through a range of standard measures and conditions for managing adverse effects. Ms. Saitaman considers that a structure plan and discretionary rule framework would better address transport and infrastructure issues, but fails to identify what particular details would be included in these or why their absence preclude plan change proceeding or management of effects through a consent process. This is despite her agreement that traffic effects from a retirement village scenario can be adequately considered by the proposed methods of control. Given the types of effect under both scenarios are the same, now submission there's material distinction. There's no material distinction that justifies different status.
Mr. Mahanick, that's something I'm going to explore with both Ms. St. Armand and Mr. Lewandowski. The material difference that appears obvious to me is the ability to decline the application between controlled or discretionary or restricted discretionary as a middle ground. And the question I want to put to both witnesses is whether they can categorically, particularly Mr. Lewandowski, can dismiss any prospect of a need to decline the application, notwithstanding the matters of control.
Certainly. And in my submission, the concerns raised by Kotahi are not that there is an adverse effect of a retirement village development that is incapable of management, which is what might justify decline, or that a controlled activity could only proceed with such changes to it that would render the granted consent futile.
Yeah.
Would be the other consideration.
Yes.
In both respects, in my submission, that is not the case. It is a question of what the appropriate transport mitigation is, i.e. the appropriate conditions that would be imposed on a consent. That is a matter that can squarely be addressed through control activity status. Okay. So that's my submission on that. But certainly I understand that planning evidence.
No, I understand that, and I guess the second part of that is the ability for third-party involvement. You touched on that earlier, and I'm referring particularly to the agency.
Just in terms of timing, we spoke about that third-party involvement, which may be necessary in our view. And you mentioned that you were working on or thinking about some provisions that might cater for that.
Yes.
Do you think you might be able to put those on the table again tomorrow morning? Because that, I think, will inform and give us a better dialogue if you are thinking that might be something which solves an issue that has come through from submitted evidence.
Yes, you can certainly do that.
Yes. Okay. I'll just make a note that you'll address us tomorrow morning on both the matter of non-RMA documents and our ability to consider them.
And the other aspect was, I think, some follow-on submissions on just some aspects of the EPSHPL as well, following some of the questions. So there were 3 matters. 3 matters. So we just keep a running record and we'll just confirm those at the end of today. Maybe
can't rely on us to keep the record.
Maybe Jacob, if someone else can do that for us, I'll I'm making some rough notes, but we'll just recap on that at the end.
Yes.
Between Megan and Jacob, it's Jacob, isn't it? Yeah.
Just on that third party matter, as I understood what you said earlier, and from reading Mr. Lewandowski's evidence, that it's going to be around the information requirements that come forward in terms of the TIA and that sort of thing, and records of consultation that's been held. It's one way of dealing with it. Is there any, and you might not be able to answer this now, but is there any legal impediment to having some form of notification clause in a district plan on a controlled activity, given that controlled activities are invariably non-notified? Have you come across that at all? Where a party is nominated as.
So there's certainly those types of provisions, absolutely, in the context of a controlled activity. I have to think about that. So again, I'm very happy.
I've seen it on RDAs and DAs quite regularly. I don't know that I can't recall having seen it on a controlled activity.
Certainly, yeah, it's something that we can look at as well.
Thank you.
It's certainly a common theme, isn't it, Daniel, that you're trying to balance between certainty and flexibility when you're looking at the fine line quite often between controlled versus restricted discretionary. You know, if you're, in my mind, if there's a zone set up to let something occur, the least line of resistance in terms of consenting should be the pathway, unless there's some good reason not, and then we go from there.
Well aware of that case, aren't we?
Yes.
Judge Kirkpatrick.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
And then at 10.7, in terms of the future Waka Kotahi involvement and to the extent its approval is required as road controlling authority, that is not directly relevant to this process, except that it does provide further comfort that to the extent that there are Waka Kotahi isn't involved through the consent process, it would still need to be involved in the implementation stage. I think that's probably the way to describe that.
Is that through things like carriage access requests?
Indeed, and as far as the acceptance of any change at specific mitigations to that intersection, for example.
Yes.
In terms of cumulative effects, Mr. Lewandowski has considered and St. Armand's evidence and proposed further amendments to the plan change provisions. They're attached to these legal submissions. And so when Mr. Lewandowski shortly takes you through briefly the plan change provisions, he can also address you on those further changes made in response to the Waka Kotahi evidence in that regard. In terms of section 32, Mr. Lewandowski has prepared a section 32 evaluation as part of the plan change request. It states that the plan change does not seek to amend any district plan objectives. On Commissioner McMahon's question about the objective of the plan change, Mr. Lewandowski will also take you to that shortly.
Good, thank you.
And so I set out at 10.10 the relevant objective regarding residential amenity values and character. And then at 10.11, address the different considerations given as far as the provision for retirement village as part of the rezoning request, i.e. as to whether it's residential rezoning without specific retirement village provision with or the status quo. At 10.12, the assessment includes the identification and assessment of the benefits and costs of the environmental, economic, social and cultural effects anticipated from the implementation of provisions. And in a lot of respects, it's similar to the NPS HPL assessment that I've already taken you through. And overall, the section 32 evaluation concludes that the plan change reflects the most appropriate option to achieve the objectives of the district plan. Just before concluding, I think a lot of my legal submissions have focused on the key issues for consideration and the key hurdles to be overcome, the key potential issues that require your consideration. But also just wish to remind you that in your consideration in terms of section 32 of the appropriateness, that also includes consideration of the various positive benefits that can result from the plan change. And so I just wish to ensure that those in your absolutely appropriate specific consideration of some of those potential issues, that you don't lose sight of the fact that there are also benefits that are resulting from the plan change. So in conclusion, as outlined in the documentation and evidence, the plan change will significantly contribute to social and economic well-being in the Masterton and Masterton districts. Proposed provisions of the plan change ensure that any development will most appropriately achieve the district plan objectives. In turn, this will assist with addressing the lack of housing supply, Somerset's, in particular in terms of retirement village. Somerset's team of experts have provided extensive and detailed technical input to appropriately address the matters raised in the officer's report and concerns of submitters. In our submission, these matters have been sufficiently covered to provide you with comfort that it can be approved, and so we do respectfully request that the plan change is approved on the basis of the provisions, well, currently is attached to these legal submissions, but there will be some further tweaks along the way. So those were my submissions. There have been questions along the way, but happy to answer any questions you may have.
Very helpful. Thanks, Daniel. David?
No, I think I've exhausted them all.
Yeah.
Thank you for the interruption.
So Daniel and Jacob, you'll give us some written text tomorrow when you prepare for us a supplementary legal submission, so we can take those away for homework. And I only have one question. I noted it in 1.5 and again in your 10.13, Daniel, that you talk there about this is this purpose point of the plan change, achieving the relevant objective of the Warwick Combined District Plan. And then you talk in 10.13 about to achieve the objective of the district plan. So is it one objective? Is there a bunch of objectives? And what objectives are we setting ourselves to meet by this plan change?
Sure. No, and I should have been clear. So it is the objectives collectively. I did earlier in 10 address what I say is most relevant, but it is the objectives of the district plan as a whole.
Yes.
But Commissioner McMahon is correct as far as also looking at the purpose or objective of the plan change. And so Mr. Lewandowski will shortly take you to that as well.
Okay, so we'll hear about the key objectives that the plan change is meeting.
Correct.
Thank you. Right, I think we're now going to get a run through of the provisions as proposed at the moment.
Correct.
Yes.
What's the best document to have in front of us?
So that the version of the plan change attached to the legal submissions,
yes, okay.
That is the current version of the plan change.
Yes.
So that would be the best one to have in front of you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
I might just shift that because
it depends how much my moustache offends you, Commissioner. But
couldn't possibly come on here. Is that right? Okay.
So yes, I'm using the version appended to his.
Yes, and I've got that on the screen.
Good, and I'm also, I guess, cross-referring to the primarily the residential chapter of the district plan. So yes. I'll be jumping between those.
Also got the last sections of your evidence in chief where you discuss some of the changes there too.
Yes, so
but it's
a matter of now or later, sir. I think in your hands how far you want to go right now.
I think understanding what the mechanical aspects as proposed would be a good starting point.
Sure, absolutely. I'll also cover off for you the question around the objective.
Yeah.
And by going through the plan change provisions, cover off a little bit, pending a further advice tomorrow around the involvement of Waka Kotahi.
Yes.
And if it's useful, Commissioner McMahon, we can also pick it up later, your question around wider demand information.
Yes.
I can give you a bit of an interim answer now, perhaps, and we can come back to that.
Yes, certainly want. I think the panel will certainly that in writing at some stage because we think it's critical.
So amendment 1, sorry, the guide there I think is self-explanatory. It just codes what has been made by whom and what changes have been made by whom. So amendment 1 is just outlining for you the extent of the site and signalling that that is the site to be rezoned. And also, whilst not mapped on there, that is the site that is to be encompassed by the rural urban boundary, which currently just runs along the southern edge of that blue outline. So the rural urban boundary would move to encompass the eastern, northern, and the sort of stepped boundary on the sorry, that's the east, rather the western, northern, and the stepped boundary on the eastern side. Yes.
Does that have any material impact, or is it more just to bring the architecture of the plan into line with what's proposed?
Correct. So I think the material impact is that a subsequent zoning change would follow that parcel boundary.
Okay.
Amendment 2 is a change to the definition of retirement village. The definition existing is shown in strike through. The definition proposed is shown in underline. The definition proposed is the definition from the National Planning Standards.
Yes.
I think the change here is not material, but it seemed a change that was readily made to bring the plan up to speed with National Planning Standards in this very discrete respect.
It wouldn't apply to the rest of the zone, it would just apply to this land?
It
or
would apply universally.
Universally, so it's the universal change across the whole residential zone.
Correct.
Yeah, and that was requested as part of your, okay.
I don't believe that, and certainly hasn't been raised by the council, and from my looking, I don't think that there are any consequential issues arising. It really is a definition of what is an RV.
Yep.
Because that's probably the only change that mirrors the National Planning Standards.
Yeah,
yes.
Correct. So you would have seen in my evidence that we have not sought to bring these changes into a planning standards template for more practical reasons.
Yes.
Amendment 3 is a proposed new appendix that sits at the rear of the plan. The appendix has a number of purposes. Firstly, it seeks to identify the site, and the practical purpose of that is to serve as a linkage to the rules that are particular to the site and in particular to a retirement village on the site. The appendix serves to divide the site into the area where a retirement village would be proposed, or where the rule particular to a retirement village applies, and then to identify the balance that would be simply residentially zoned.
Don't know what your eyes are like, but I cannot read that plan.
We can provide you, I think, with a better A4 copy, and in fact there is an A4 copy attached to, bear with me a moment, Commissioner, I'm sorry. No, that's just the size stand. Well, it's still the same size.
Perhaps
we will get you an A4 version of that.
Perhaps in the morning, and this is a bugbear of mine because I don't, I really find it uncomfortable following things on computers and trying to blow things up. Producing evidence without clear plans is a real thing. Whether it's particular to me or not, it is something for me. So, a full clear sweep suite of key plans that we can read the words would be really great to have tomorrow. This means nothing to me because I can't read the key.
Understood, Commissioner, and we'll get you a full one. But to take you through that as best I can, then, with reference to the key, the green is signal for retirement village development. The red is the balance. Probably difficult to see along the northern edge is a very small strip of planted buffer to the north. Centrally within that green area, you'll see a hatched square. That is the area that is proposed for a increased height limit to do with a main building on the retirement village. The white arrow at the bottom is to show shows the location of a connection into the site. So that is the access into the site. The arrow to the north shows a potential future road connection. It is simply signalling an indicative connection point should that ever be required. And the black arrows are simply trying to signal indicative connections that might exist through the site. Acknowledging that certainly the residential portion has not in any way been designed, and master planning work on a village is still to be completed as well. So it's termed an outline development plan. It stops short of being a structure plan, but it shares some similarities between the two concepts.
Thanks. There's one other aspect on the key that I can read on my screen, and that's the stormwater management area indicative. Is that the area to the west?
That is the area to the west, correct, against the railway line.
Yes.
And that is simply to show that the stormwater solution in terms of an attenuation pond, etc., takes up a certain amount of area. Conceptually, at that point, it is located there. It may ultimately be located a little bit further down, but it's really to show that there is a need to accommodate it, and there is sort of size and scope to it.
Any questions? Okay, thanks much. Just carry on.
Just below that, this recommended in the report that planted buffer extends around all of the site. Myself and Mr. Bentley disagree with that, and that's reflected in the blue stripe here.
Okay.
So that takes us to Amendment 4. That is an amendment to an existing policy, 532K. That policy, as existing, applies to a development known as the Orchards Retirement Village in Greytown. And the purpose of the amendment is to utilise that existing district plan approach to providing for a site-specific retirement village and to build on it for this site. And this is where you first see the reference to Appendix 16, sort of closing the loop of my earlier comment.
Thank you.
Below that is a new amendment, and Ms. Minnick foreshadowed this. In her evidence, Ms. Saint-Amand queried the level of permitted development that could be achieved on the site. She spoke about non-residential activities, but also highlighted that subject to meeting minimum lot sizes, any number of dwellings could be built on the site. I'll address that. Well, address it now, but we'll come back to it again later on. I think there's a practical limitation to a multitude of houses being built on the site without a subdivision. It would take a significant capital expenditure, for instance, to build 10, 20, 30 houses on the site without first, I guess, having the land for sale or then being able to on sell. Foreseeably, someone could build a number of houses, subdivide around them. So whilst I think the likelihood of that occurring is small, I nevertheless think that there's an easy solution to the issue identified by Mr. Mann, and that is what I have proposed there. That change excludes a retirement village, noting that a retirement village would ordinarily not be subdivided in any case. So, and there's a controlled activity specific to. The next change is the insertion of a new standard 552 brackets N. That is a standard relating to the mitigation of noise and vibration, as applicable to the land in Appendix 16. That isn't specific to a retirement village, but in terms of the layout of the ODP, for all intents and purposes, it is specific to a retirement village. But it acknowledges that in the event that a retirement village were not to occur on the site, that the intent of that standard would nevertheless apply to a residential development. And the application of that is a spatial one.
This new standard would apply to all residential going forward in Marsden District?
I don't know the answer to that, Commissioner. I've not checked the draft plan with that in mind. Certainly it doesn't apply to any other residential development in Marsden currently.
Because it's the land identified in Appendix 16.
Exactly. There is no equivalent standard in the district plan that I've seen. The only other comment to make here was that this standard was developed with reference to Kiwi Rail guidelines and constant Kiwi Rail. There are some minor variations, particularly around vibration, I believe, that were agreed with Kiwi Rail by the noise consultant for Welhom. And just to note, Kiwi Rail haven't submitted on the plan change, despite being notified of it, so we would have taken acceptance of it. Which takes us to standard 552 brackets O. So in the structure of the plan of the residential zone, it first lists permitted activities, and then at 552 it lists standards for permitted activities. At 552M, it currently lists a set of standards that are specific to the orchards retirement village. What this standard does is mirrors that approach and provides the standards specific to a retirement village on this site. The introduction to that says that all buildings and activities associated with the development and operation of a retirement village shall comply with all residential zone and district-wide permitted activity standards, again mirroring the approach to the orchards and other instances, except where the following apply. So the standards that are listed here are either additional to or augment other existing permitted activity standards.
Yes. My question there, Mr. Lewandowski, is do those permitted activity standards, as they relate to the Appendix 16 site, become a precondition to being a controlled activity?
Yes.
If you don't meet those standards, are you still a controlled activity, or do you default to another activity status?
You default to restricted discretion.
Okay. Right. So, for example, if if you exceeded the height limit for residential outside the 14 metre area, or if you exceeded 14 metres, it would no longer be a controlled activity.
That's correct, sir. And just to close that loop for you, 554 of the plan relating to restricted discretionary says the following are restricted discretionary activities, and it says matter A, any permitted or controlled activity that does not meet one or more of the standards for permitted or controlled.
Got it. Thank you. And that's 554.
554 bracket A.
Bracket A. Thank you. Good.
What, because this is a trigger point between controlled and restricted discretionary status,
yes,
could there be a specific intersection upgrade standard added here?
Structurally, there could be, yes.
That might reflect the propositions from the Somerset's traffic experts.
And further to that, because at the moment I've read ahead, you've got those sort of matters as a matter of control in the controlled activity rule 553.
I've got what sorts of matters there?
Roading and safety and the provision of access, specifically including A to B, improvements and alterations to existing roads, safety improvements to the intersection. They're matters of control. They're not preconditions to an activity status, are they?
That's correct.
Yeah. So what the chair is suggesting is
could they be shifted up? Yes, I think structurally the answer is yes. My question would be, I guess, in reference to what Ms. Gordon and Ms. Merson are saying, we would need to think about which of those interventions that they identify could be appropriate as, if you like, a preconditional matter, and then try and craft that as a permitted activity.
But they do.
There's nothing that precludes.
No, but they do have a menu, don't they?
They do have a menu.
And that menu could be described in the plan as a, or in plan in words, potentially.
I'm trying to recall that menu, sir. And some of them certainly I think could be. I would need to sit down with them and have a bit of think about how that.
Well, that's just food for thought. I think we'll just leave that with you as a concept, and you can come back and.
When Mr. Lewandowski gives us full evidence later on, that could be something that he addresses, and also with the benefit of
Yes.
Ms. Wilson and Mr. Georgeson's evidence.
Yes, but this takes some time to discuss through, so I don't want to rush it. If that's a structural solution that might provide the sort of certainty of outcome that Mr. Georgeson and, sorry, I forgot the name. Yes, are suggesting as being required in any event is reasonable. That could be a way of triggering that through. So we'll leave that with you to come back to us.
Understand, and it is, one of the other aspects will just be ensuring that it's sufficiently certain for all parties.
Yes.
If there were to be those sorts of additional standards, and that a height standard is quite easy and objective, and so as far as roading improvements, it would be a question of certainty.
Yes, but that's why I was suggesting it might be a mixture of plan and words. I've seen that used successfully before to be super certain. Okay, thank you. We'll carry on.
So the next stop, if you like, on the trip here is Rule 553E. So this is a new control activity rule that is specific to a time village on that portion of the appendix side. Maybe a couple of things to highlight here, Commissioners. The first would be matter 2. That talks about the provision of adequate supply for water for firefighting, and relatedly, matter 3, and that is the provision of water supply, wastewater disposal, and stormwater collection. Now, again, one to come back to perhaps later on, is there is a district-wide standard that talks about NZS 4404, but I might close that loop later on, foreshadowing, I guess, that now. The other,
Just before you do, is that a subdivision rule or a land
it's
use?
a district-wide standard for land use. There is a subdivision controlled activity rule, Commissioner McMahon, that then refers to the same.
Okay. DA.
And then the other relevant matter here is matter 4, which talks to traffic matters, transport matters generally. The amendments you see in blue have been proposed following the Section 42A report, and their purpose is really to provide a greater level of specificity than what was originally provided, which is not to say those matters couldn't have been considered within the broader heading, but I've simply sought to draw out a greater level of detail in those matters. And the deletion there is just an incorporation into 4D. So there's no loss, if you like, of the matter. It's just been incorporated into a singular transport stop.
Tell me in your words, Mitch, what happens if there's disagreement on these matters between Somerset and the council? Particularly when you're using the terms, I just pick one out, E2, the provision of adequate supply. So what happens if there's disagreement? What's the resolution pathway?
Well, the resolution pathway, I guess, first and foremost, is a discussion between the two. The council ultimately holds the pen on the resource consent decision as a controlled activity. So, could therefore craft conditions as it sees fit and issue a consent with those conditions. The recourse for Somerset, were it not to agree, is objection and appeal.
Yep.
Otherwise, I'm crystal ball gazing, Commissioner, as to how that might play out. But
But it is a negotiation. Given that the council, if this was approved by us, the council cannot decline an application. Its power really is in the power of conditions, provided that the matters that are reserved for them are broad enough to deal with any residual adverse effects which need to be managed at that stage. That's the way you look at it. Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, again, I suspect we'll come back to it later, but I guess we're in a situation where the site is currently zoned